Hello, everyone. We are beginning. Please enjoy your food, enjoy your beverages, enjoy. Welcome to SaksWorks. We're so happy to have you. We are so excited to present Christine Pride, Joe Piazza, in a conversation moderated by Glynnis MacNicol. Before we do, I just want to tell you a little bit about SaksWorks, where we find ourselves today in this beautiful, airy, sunlit room overlooking the Statue of Liberty with many, many plants and a signature scent that's very light and airy. SaksWorks is a new membership club meant for work, for life, for health, for joy, for exercising your brain, for really finding our purpose again and finding our comfort and enjoying excellent food. Thank you, B. Arthur. We're in a moment right now where we want to choose where we're going to be and who we are with and how we spend our time more mindfully and with a lot more purpose and clarity, and SaksWorks is a place that will hopefully help you find that and experience that and support you in that ongoing journey. So without further ado, I feel like conversations like this are just one of the things that make SaksWorks unique and special, and I cannot think of a better trio to kick off a dynamic and uncensored and, dare I say, uncancel conversation today about this wonderful book, We Are Not Like Them. So thank you, ladies, and take it away.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. That was so nice. Can you just follow me around and introduce me to people?
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you, everyone who's here, for coming. Thank you, everyone who's watching, for tuning in. A little background maybe before we start, which is I have known Joe and Christine separately for a very long time. Christine and I have known each other for 15 years, I think. She used to be an editor when I also worked in publishing, and then she became the editor of my memoir. Best editor. I was so lucky. And Joe and I have known each other for more than a decade. We shared a hotel room in Tampa for the Republican
Convention.
But my clearest memory of the Republican Convention is Joe and I ditching it to go eat steak.
And drink red wine.
And drink red wine.
That tracks.
Yeah, we watched it on the TV.
Excellent decision at the time. And then, fast forward a few years, and when my memoir came out, Joe had published a novel, Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win, Christine, who was also her editor.
But coincidentally, I did not realize.
No, it was
these two books up completely
separately.
And scheduled them at the same time.
And I didn't know you signed up Joe's book until after the fact. Like, it wasn't part of it. It wasn't in the conversation.
Like such a weird.
Yeah, it was a publishing meet cute that resulted in Joe and my book publishing within weeks of each other, and the three of us going on a book tour, which was really rare at that time, but it's even rarer right now for obvious reasons. And
the last book tour.
We were on the last book tour. We were at the last party. We were on the last book tour. And I have a very clear memory, and tell me if this aligns with both of your memories, of driving to Dollywood.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
How could we forget?
Driving to Dollywood on our way to Nashville, I think, to Parnassus to do an event.
Yeah.
And we stopped at Dollywood, but as we were driving there, I was driving, and Joe and Christine were discussing a potential book they wanted to collaborate on, and so I heard.
Well, we were well into the book then,
but this
actually.
is the first time I heard about
we were
it.
talking about it with you. Yeah,
So that's my origin story of how this book came to be, and that leads into, I want to know your origin stories, because you collaborating, you're both coming at this. This book covers so much in so many layers, which is extraordinary. But just the two of you are coming at this from very different places, and the decision to collaborate on a book together is, I would say, equivalent to deciding to get married. It's just
It's harder.
I would know.
It's much harder. Yeah.
But I'm curious. I'm curious how you came. Like, how did this then come about? How did you decide to work together? That's a big deal.
Our meet here. Do you want to start?
I will. And I will say, I put more thought into should Christine and I collaborate on this book than I put into marrying Nick Astor and having 2 kids.
I married Joe and Nick for
she
one
did.
more connection in this.
In vintage Halston in front of a Sphinx.
Yeah,
So
it was wonderful.
check the Google, you'll see it. So Christine, as Glynnis said, was my editor, and we just really loved working together, and we also felt this spark that I think doesn't always come around when you're a grown-up woman with like, it's hard to make friends as an adult, and we really liked each other, we liked hanging out, and then she was the best editor that I've ever had, and I've had some good editors.
And you've published a million books, so you've had a lot of editors.
I looked back on the Facebook, it's been 9 years and 11 books, I think. Yeah, I should.
I'll
I
just
don't know.
second the best editor.
Best editor, best.
You are the
And-
best editor.
Nice.
So we then collaborated on another book project, the TV show Younger. Do we have any Younger fans in the room? Yes. Yes.
And
There's,
Sutton Foster?
there's always Younger fans in the room. They asked us to write kind of like a fun book based off a book on the TV show called Marriage Vacation. And Christina was the editor, and she hired me to write it in 4 weeks. And we had to write so quickly over Christmas vacation while I was with my in-laws, and it had to be hilarious, smart, and really dirty. So dirty. In fact, like we sent an early draft to the TV Land people, the network, and they were like,
Not
dirtier,
dirty enough.
Not dirty enough. And so Christine and I was texting under the table at my very fancy mother-in-law's Christmas Eve dinner, and I'm like, is this dirty enough? So you really bond over that.
Sure do.
Sure do. And then Christine approached me after that because we had really broken all of the ice and social norms and
Boundaries.
gone, and said, I've had this idea for a really long time for a book. I didn't think I was ever necessarily going to write it. Like, we work so well together, we write so well together. Should we try this? And I'll let Christine hop in here.
No, that was it. This was in early 2018, January, February 2018, and we were coming off the heels of this book, and really we were so in the trenches together and collaborating, and it was fast and furious, and so we like came up for air, and it was a little bit like, what's next? And I had this idea kicking around a while, which is, you know, as an editor, you often have book ideas and you think, oh, I want somebody to write this book and I want somebody to write this book. And, you know, there was a personal connection and just thinking how upsetting and harrowing all these headlines are about police shootings and police violence in America, of course, and these headlines that kind of come and go in waves, and it's so upsetting. And so, you know, what would happen if there was a black woman and a white woman who had a lifelong friendship and it was affected by something like this? Was, you know, just the germ of the idea that I went to Joe with, and it was sort of like that kind of bingo moment that we dove in, and she was still working on a million projects and I was still working full-time at Simon & Schuster, publishing wonderful books like these
I'm the
authors
full-time.
up here. So we were doing it on the side, essentially.
Charlotte wasn't even in the world yet.
No, and we were like, let's just see what happens here. And then all these years later, here we are.
3 years later.
This is what happened.
Yes.
So was there a kernel of the idea that come from any? There's a lot. So I don't like to give away too much plot when the book was only published a week ago. So like when we do the paperback, we can do like a full
The
plot.
deep dive.
Yeah.
The deep dive. But we could give the overview.
The general
too,
sense
yeah.
of. Do you want to? I can sum it up in elevator. Be better in elevator.
No,
pitch.
you,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
fun.
we wanna hear
We're
some of
tired
that.
of telling
It's the
our
novel
elevator
of
pitch.
two lifelong friends, a white woman who has struggled to get pregnant and is now pregnant through many, many rounds of IVF, and her black best friend who is an up-and-coming local television news anchor who has her eyes on the chair.
The chair.
For everyone
The morning
currently watching
chair.
the morning show. And they're out to me, and you, this is just the first chapter, so I'm not really giving too
You're not
much
giving
away.
anything away, no.
I'm like, no spoiler alerts in my life. I don't want to know anything.
A lot. Well, you know, we've been spoiled on national TV already.
Oh,
We're just letting-
yeah.
we're not
Okay,
right, we're not
okay.
right, Yeah.
That ship has sailed. and
It
so some of
opens
the
with
surprises.
Riley, black woman who's a news anchor, going to meet her best friend Jen. They haven't seen each other in a long time for a drink, and you get the little bit of the backstory that Riley has loaned Jen the money for her most recent IVF, even though the money she's loaned her is not like, it's like half of her own savings. It's not a small thing. And they're sort of catching up, and you start to sort of see the disparities. And the really small thing I love in the opening pages is where Jen sends Riley a text that says, even you are overdoing CP time, because it's such a small.
She did.
Yeah,
She did.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I just think it's it's like I don't know if it's still termed microaggression, but it's like even within a friendship that goes back that many decades, that
what are you allowed to say?
What are you allowed to say?
Well, and it's so interesting to me because it was Riley who taught Jen CP time, and so it was kind of an inside joke between them. But then Riley sees the text and she's like, I never should have told Jen about CP time. But Jen just thinks she's being endearing. Yeah. And so, and like, there's, again.
And so it began.
And so it begins.
But it's such a brilliant way to introduce that relationship, because as a reader, I was like, oh, that's not, I can't, no. I know that phrase too. I can't imagine using it.
I actually did not know that phrase when we wrote that phrase, so that was...
Joe learned a lot of them.
Yeah.
Stumbling
At the end of the chapter, the book opens with a cold open of a young boy being shot. It's a very intense opening to the book. And the first chapter ends with Jen getting a phone call from her husband, who's a police officer, that he's been involved in a shooting, and then Riley gets called back to the studio because a young black boy has been shot, and that dives us into the book. But in those opening pages, you have established a number of things that I think is fraught in really friendships that we can all, female friendships, I think that if you've had long-term female friendships into your 40s, like you have now hit on a whole bunch of things. Race is the most obvious one. Fertility, success, class, financials. If you started out with somebody in grade school sort of on the same block, and then lo and behold in your 40s one of you is living in, just for an example, a studio apartment, and one of you is and an enormous house with, like, you know, a second home, and you're internationally traveling every weekend. That is a very intense thing to shoulder. I mean, we talk about that, shouldering that in a marriage. I think it's far more intense in a friendship. So you hitting on all these things.
Yeah.
Tell me how you came to this, and tell me how you, first of all, tell me how, does this spring from any experience? And then tell me, like, what it was like for the two of you writing back and forth from this. Because you're bringing very different experiences to the table.
Well, it's funny that you say that about the first chapter doing so much, because the first chapter was our hardest to write, and we rewrote and wrote and rewrote this chapter approximately 1 million times. And so, because we did have to establish both the worldview and the dynamic of their friendship, and we didn't want it to take too long to get to the action, you know, the chapter just had to do a lot. So
it does a lot.
Yeah, so thank you for saying
Thank you for noticing.
because that was really, really, really hard.
Yeah. Well, and so first off, Christine and I are big readers. She has published so many books, and I've written so many books, and we see a lot, and I would say too many books about romantic love, romantic relationships. There's always a wedding, and it's gonna save you from everything. And we don't see nearly enough commercial women's fiction in particular about the love and bond between two women, and how women like essentially save each other's lives and get each other through the day. And so it was very important for Christine and I to do that. And the book at its core is a story about female friendship. I mean, it brings in obviously so many issues of race and social justice, but I think, one of the big messages for me, and I go back and forth every day about the messages, but it's like, what can a friendship stand? What can a friendship sustain? And also, how can those bonds of friendship, particularly early friendship, get you through some of the worst possible things that can happen?
Also, just to emphasize your point, friendship exists, marriage exists within a literal legal contract, and a very clear decision that you were committing to another person. And friendships, like particularly long-term friendships, do not. And I think one of the things this book hits on, when you say what can it stand, like friendship, all relationships require this, but there's no like leaning back on, we invited 500 people to our wedding, and then we have to explain to them why we're divorcing. Do you get the wedding presents back? Or like, there's no going to a lawyer, and that's...
It's a choice you make every day, and I think that that's something that they struggle with in this book, where, especially since they've been long-term, they have been long-term friends, but they've also been long-distance friends.
Yeah. Which is a different beast altogether.
Yeah, and so now they're back together, so that was going to change the dynamic of their relationship anyway, now living in the same city. And so it is this question of, how is our friendship, which we all, is universal, like how is our friendship going to change because one of us is pregnant or not, or one of us got married or not, or one of us is moving or not, or one of us has so much more money than the other, like how do we navigate these changes? So that's kind of the universal that every friendship experiences. And then on top of that, they're dealing with this very specific incident and this very specific subject because, they're a Black woman and a white woman, an added layer of complexity in terms of then how they're going to deal with race.
There's another line in the opening chapter where Jen, in leaving, says something. His husband's name Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
Jen says something happened to Kevin, and Riley says that line stays with me, ends up staying with me because Jen's perceiving this as something. There's a shooting and something happened to Kevin, the white police officer, not something. And in that moment, you sort of see a nugget of how we all, at the end of the day, experience it as it applies to us,
right.
And the work everyone has to do to experience it as it applies
to everyone,
to others, to the world.
Well, I mean, and Glynnis, you asked something in the beginning about, our decision to collaborate together, and I think that was part of it because, for my part, I had this idea, like I said, nursing for a while, but I felt daunted by the idea of writing a book, frankly. I mean, it turns out it's very, very hard. So there's that newsflash. And I was working still full time. And so I was like, am I ever going to do this? And it didn't feel, if I hadn't met Joe and the stars hadn't aligned and, the sequence of events hadn't happened, maybe not. I thought I was going to have an editorial career forever.
That's the rom-com I want.
Yeah.
Right?
And I loved being an
We
editor.
fall in love at the end.
Yeah. Well,
This is the end. This is the final scene of the rom-com.
And I
You could
still
marry
love
us.
being an editor, but we saw an opportunity not only just to work together, because we could have worked together and wrote, a thriller about somebody who
Two
throws a
women
body in the East River.
drinking a lot of
whatever.
rosé in a
Yeah.
cabin.
Things go very wrong.
I would like to write that book next, actually.
But we saw an opportunity not only to work together, but then to do something unique with this idea that we would write a different book. If Joe had taken this premise and written a book, it would have been one thing. If I had taken this premise and written this book, it would have been another thing. But the idea that we could do it together and then bring in our two different perspectives and experiences, made it feel like it was going to be just a completely different aspect. And that's what we learned along the way while we were writing it. Joe learned things like CP time and what Jack and Jill was, and I mean all these things. And vice versa, because we have experienced the world in a very different way.
You learned who John Denver was.
I learned who John Denver was.
And we went to Cracker Barrel. We went to Cracker
I mean,
Barrel.
it was a real cultural exchange.
I learned you, John.
Thank you.
Right?
It sure does.
I know.
Yes.
You try going on a road trip through the South and finding somewhere to eat. I was hungry.
But we also, we hear conversations that the other is not privy to. I mean, I hear conversations in all Black spaces that Joe would never be privy to, and vice versa. And so one of the things that we wanted to do on the page is bring those conversations in. And so the reader is also eavesdropping on both of those conversations. And we wouldn't have been able to do that had we not written the book together, because we each wouldn't have necessarily either known about the conversations or been able to recount them with any kind of validity or authenticity. Like, I could imagine what Kevin's white family was saying at the dinner table, but
I don't know if it would have been totally accurate.
exactly
Or
or
fair. And that's
fair.
the thing,
Yeah,
right?
that's the thing. Like having an eyewitness.
Yeah,
to,
but I've heard
Yeah.
conversations in all white spaces that happen after
Yeah.
a police shooting. I'm friends with cops. We talked to a lot of police officers for this book. We talked to police wives. We talked to the mothers of shooting victims and the shooting victims. And we did the book in first person at the last minute. I made Christine change everything because I'm a terrible
forgot that.
friend.
That's right. That's right.
I didn't forget that.
Yeah, she never will. She never will. But we wanted you to go into the character's head and then see what they say and who they say it to, because I think that we parse our words a lot.
Right.
And especially when it comes to race, This race is, Deborah Roberts said this when she interviewed us for Good Morning America, because we're the Good Morning America book club pick, and so I put that in there.
Well done, Joe.
Can't
The
stop
plug.
But she said,
Subtle,
she
very
mostly
subtle.
opens it by saying, race feels like the third rail in America. This feels like something that so many people are just so uncomfortable to talk about. We have to talk about it, but how do we get through it? And what we're hoping is that because this is fiction, well, it's a novel that looks pretty too, which I think matters for who picks it up. And so you could talk about the characters, and you can talk about the things they say and the things they do, without having to talk about yourself.
Yep.
Then you can talk about your personal experience after that. Like, it's a really nice way to break the ice when
Yeah.
it comes to race.
So I have 2 questions, and then we'll take questions. One is sort of piggybacking on that. What has the response been like? And are you guys getting different responses? Are you hearing different things? Like, what has the response been like? Because we've just also spent a week listening to like the feedback from an article about another friendship, like the bad art friendship. And I just think that we really, one of the reasons we're also fascinated by female friendship is we do not have a lot of stories around it that really dive into the complexity.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what has the response been like?
It's been
intense stuff coming.
overwhelming. I mean, in a really positive way. This is my first time on this journey as a writer, although I've seen it, from the other side. But
It's different.
It's very different. And when you work so hard in a vacuum, we had each other, but you're still in a vacuum, and you feel so mission oriented, and you're dealing with a hard topic, and so that you have to really be prepared to lean into that hard topic, because people are going to have reactions, feelings, et cetera, et cetera. We were well aware that people were gonna just hear the premise of the book and make assumptions about our agenda or what was gonna happen in the book. And so there was so much preparation for this over the years, and now that it's out and the response has been, so positive on a critical level in terms of reviews, which is just honestly nice for your ego, and it's just nice that people like the book. But even more than that, when people say that it's starting conversations and that they're taking it to talk to a friend, and workplaces are using it. We did a
Workplaces are
D&I
using it for
event.
D&I
it's just
events,
that's the kind of
which is
response
cool.
that's been really gratifying.
Tell the story that I like.
Oh, so this woman, I already know what she is talking about. Because we share a brain. But this woman, we learned of a story of a woman, a black woman, who last summer, when everybody's feelings and emotions were very raw, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, she and a white friend of hers had an exchange of words that she felt like the white friend had said something that offended her in whatever way. And she just cut this friend off. She was like, I'm not talking to her anymore. And then she read our book, and she read this piece that I wrote in The Stylist about being a black woman having white friends. And she reached out to her. She felt like she might have been because she was so raw, that she might have been just too quick to judge, and maybe that friendship wouldn't survive. Who knows? I would love to know the end of the story.
We still don't know yet. I'm dying. I think about
But
it all the time.
the idea that it would just spark a conversation, that before this friendship even died, like they would at least talk about what happened last summer from a more maybe calmer place. And so when things like that happen, to me that's better than a 5-star review or whatever. That's like it working.
It's
in real
it's
life.
a book that's like doing something in the world, which we both think that's the most.
But also
important
5-star reviews are nice, so if you feel compelled to go and leave some,
Boom!
please.
Oh my God! Also, well done.
Just to be clear.
Yes, thank you. We don't
Can I
not
make it-
like that.
This is apropos of nothing and not even a question that you asked, but I'm going to brag about your 2 books for a second, since we have these connections
Christine,
up
this
here.
is your spotlight. So
No, but
No,
I
let
wanna-
her go.
It's still self-serving one way or
Okay,
another.
okay.
But when I published your books in 2018, the reason I was so interested in these stories is they dealt with women's issues at the time. Like we were coming off Trump being elected, and so Joe's book's about women in politics, and Glynnis's book, memoir about the choices that women make in their lives, and Glynnis, which is a subject that Glynnis and I have talked about for years, being unmarried and childless by choice. And they really fit into a zeitgeist. And as an editor, you're trying to publish books that are about the conversation that people are having right then. And so I feel like this book, similarly, the timing works because these are the conversations that people are having right now. So every book has its own kind of path to be in the world in a woo-woo way, like when it's supposed to be in the world.
And it's
so I
also
feel
though
like
fitting, like this conversation is an American
ebbs and
conversation
flows, for
that we
sure.
are in, much like conversations about women. So many women, older women reached out to me and they were like, do you think you're the first woman to not be married and not have a kid? And I was like, no.
There's only one answer to that question. It's not
But
a
it was
trick question.
interesting because I was like, this conversation has been going on for so long, and it rises up in different ways. It rises up in different ways, and you guys conceived of this book in 2018.
But people seem more receptive to it
Of
now.
course,
to have
because I mean, it
conversations.
broke open last summer in a much different way than it certainly has, I think, in our lifetime.
Right.
I imagine people older than us would have a different response.
But the assumptions about the book are very interesting from people because there's so much knee-jerk reaction on social media and people.
Really, that's shocking.
And people assume that we wrote this after George Floyd's murder as like an opportunistic play
Right.
to play on that. We
Did
turned
not.
the book in the week before. Our final draft was turned in the week
Yeah.
before.
I mean, that's just
that
evidence
happened.
of how
And
evergreen.
it is. I mean,
Sadly,
we had been talking about it
it's
for
a
so long.
breaking bookend to this story.
People also like to assume that, I wrote all of the white character and she is me. We were on an interview yesterday where he's like, so you're Jen and you're Riley. We're like,
No.
do you read fiction?
Do you know how novels work?
Or that it was all my idea and then they just brought on a black woman so that I would have cover to write this
Wow.
book, which that's the one that pisses me off the most. And Christine gets upset when I get so passionate. But because I'm like, you're thinking that Christine has no agency, that she wouldn't know, she is the woman who came to me with this brilliant idea. Like, how dare you think that I then...
That
like,
you're not a
co-authored her?
professional
Yes,
writer.
I know, it's ridiculous.
But I think this is, I'm going to say something that we haven't talked about in an interview, but I actually
love
do.
it when she
I
does
know.
this.
But this is actually, I think, an interesting difference between being an editor and a writer in that, and this is my first book, so yes, we've been getting overwhelmingly positive feedback, so it really doesn't bother me when, people are going to have...
Oh yeah, haters don't bother Christine.
Yeah, I feel like people are gonna have reactions, and
Yeah.
I just feel like we can't help what people are. We prepared ourselves, but we also can't help what people are gonna think or the conspiracy theories they're gonna have, and so it just
This is what makes you such a good editor.
it doesn't
She's
make
very
me
even
upset.
keel. I am not.
Yeah.
I
Well,
am
we're
not.
yin and yang.
But I
in that
also
way,
don't mind
but-
reactions. Like,
Yeah.
if someone didn't like the book, I'm like, whatever. I don't know. There's a book for everyone out there. I don't like baseless assumptions.
Right.
Like that are then allowed to percolate in the world of social media without anyone ask us a question. We're so freaking available. I'm happy to talk about this book with you.
True. We are.
We
If
are.
there's one thing that has been clear in this publication,
We're available.
we will talk to
We will
anyone
talk to anybody
at any point
at any
in time.
point, about anything.
I'm often awake at 2 a.m. I'm like, this
No,
could be a good
don't
opportunity.
Tell people they can talk to you at 2 a.m.
But we
Don't
do.
talk to
We
Christine
do.
at 2
We do
a.m.
because we want to talk about this book all the time.
No,
We're very,
boundaries.
very
Wait.
passionate.
Christine, do not invite that in.
I'll just call
Our,
you at 2
our
a.m.
therapist is over there being like, I'd like you guys to have more boundaries.
Well, I think you answered. I was curious about how does one actually collaborate, but I think you answered that. So
in a
let's-
Google Doc.
Yeah,
Google
in a
Doc.
Google Doc. I'm
Google
not
Doc.
sure time-wise what we're at, but let's ask some questions. Let's take questions.
Yeah.
Rachel? No, Rachel, you have a question.
I do have a question. It's a two-parter. The first question is, why did you switch to first person? And the second question is, tell me what you love about SaksWorks. And you just have to answer the first part of the question.
No,
I
I'll
really enjoy
answer
this
the second. I
Sharon's.
know.
Yeah, I'm
The greenery around here is amazing.
really light and beautiful, and that view of Statue of Liberty.
This is actually one of the most beautiful spaces I've ever been in.
really
I'm not even exaggerating.
I'd like my house to look like
It's
this.
beautiful, and I'm never leaving. So.
Yeah, so great.
I was just kidding, but I am genuinely
Yeah.
curious about the first person.
Well, honestly, because it was
Do you want to tell the story?
It was my idea.
How I learned about this?
Yeah, I know. Christina's constantly finding out things at the last minute or because I post them to Instagram. But it's because I think I've already told you because we do share a brain, so I'm like, she must know. I've been better.
I like the surprise.
Right?
Never a dull
There's
moment.
so few surprises in life. And but I was reading the book. I was doing one last read before we're about to turn it in, and we're turning it in 2 weeks from then. And I'd also had people read it, and they had comments about it that it didn't feel as emotionally charged, and it was hard to relate to some of the characters. And so I was thinking, I'm like, but what if we're in their heads? Because friendship is so hard to convey on the page. Like, how do you convey a closeness between two people if you can't like get in their heads, you know, except for like really boring tropes? And so I called Christine. I was like, "Are you sitting down?"
Words you always love to hear. Yeah, it's always.
And I should have been
That
like,
and no offense, but don't take offense to this. Those people you love to hear.
I should have just brought you a drink or something. And like I think we have to rewrite the whole book in first person in the next 2 weeks. And,
That happened.
But then I was like, all right, let me try it. Like, let me do it with the first 2 chapters and see if it works. And then you read it, and it did.
It worked, and it was a really good editorial decision.
It makes you feel like such a more intimate connection with these women and then what they're going through. And that was our goal because, again, like, not to criticize the media, but to criticize the media, and I'm allowed to because I've been part of the problem for 20 years. It's like reporting on gun violence generally, and particularly gun violence in the Black community, it is clickbait. We never see anyone dive into the stories behind the headlines. There's no humanity in the reporting. And we wanted to get at who are the real human beings involved in this situation.
And that there's a toll, you know. I mean, one thing that Riley really deals with in this book is she's really dedicated to her job. She wants to be successful. She has her eye on the chair. And, you know, separating that kind of bald ambition with the idea of the story that she's covering hits close to home in so many ways. So how do you maintain your objectivity in the media and as a reporter when you really find yourself, you know, emotionally affected, indeed maybe traumatized by what you're covering and the history of it? And that, you know, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with.
And she's also given the story because she's the Black woman in the newsroom. But then on the flip side of that, and there's so much going on. On the flip side of that, she wants to cover the story because it's a big story, and she knows that like that will help her get to the job that she wants, and so she doesn't reveal all of her connections to this story. And so, what are the ethics of that? Question from B.
First of all, bravo! I love this so much.
Thank you. Such a good cheerleader.
So smart, like and thoughtful about it. I really appreciate that because obviously I am a Black woman, but there's a white dad stuck in my Black woman's mind.
That's a book.
My parents raised me to be entitled. And
Yes, assertive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so about 50% of the time.
Yeah.
So that's why I love this book so much because last year we were going through it. You had brought it. It was like
It was a lot.
yes, we've always known about racism, but damn. And to me, like all my friends that are like actual friends, we have been talking about this in education and other places where. But the hurtful thing was like the racial apathy more than the racial violence.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I'm so glad y'all are doing this because last year I was really struggling. Like, you know, like people were like, oh, you know, people who told me overcharge for this, come talk about mental health, blah, blah, blah.
Ugh.
And they're like, come and talk about racial trauma, but we don't have a budget for it.
Yeah.
Literally, like, I didn't leave her on for like weeks. You
Right.
know? So one of the things that I said, I want my piece to be the justice. I do not want to over-identify with Black struggle. I do not want to talk about paying for white people.
Absolutely.
You know, because I think that some of these things aren't for white people to do, right? Like, slavery isn't Black history, it's white history.
Yeah.
It's white American history. That said, I do think that, you know, when people like, it's not my job to educate you, it's also, we've seen what happens when white people like to talk about racism on their own.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to have a way, because people get so defensive, right? It's like, I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about whiteness.
Yeah,
Who I
totally.
suffer from, I'm talking about white people.
Yeah.
So I really
What does he look like that way?
so
Is he hot?
Is his name Chad?
Kyle.
I'm basically a predator, but I can live.
Look at me. Hey, I need you to write a book immediately.
I know. I need you to like pull up a chair up here. It's hilarious.
Like, I'm aware of my privilege,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I'm aware of like times when I'm and I just feel like I'm just so glad because like sometimes it gets uncomfortable. Like I have to say, I teach my clients, you know, data not damage.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody says all lives matter, I'm like, oh god, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to keep going back and forth. I got it, right? It's not gonna hurt me.
Right.
So I'm really glad that like there's just other ways to have this conversation without it being so fatal. Because yeah, I have relationships I have to walk away from. But
It's
like,
hard.
if we can learn anything from white people, it shouldn't be hate. You know?
Yeah.
I don't want that. Like I don't want
Energy.
that, you know, but I don't love hate. So I'm so glad for y'all.
No, I'm so glad you said that, and I think that that's something that Riley, our character, really struggles with, and in a meta way that we struggled with in writing this book, because it was important to me as a Black author, as an editor, to have the kind of representation that we don't see in books, right? In terms of Riley as a character, the type of character she is, and that she stays away from all tropes and stereotypes, and that Black women and men, presumably, but mainly Black women,
We
it's
don't
going to
think
be.
about men that much.
But that they're going to see their experience affirmed on the page, right? And be able to relate to Riley as a character. And I have to say, it is really hard. One of the greatest challenges of this book is that it's really hard to write a book for two different racial audiences. You are really going, and most books are either honestly written for Black people or white people, like when it comes to so much in our society, right? And so that was hard, so that, to your point about, feeling like you're explaining the Black experience, I didn't want Riley to be a tool for education for white people. I wanted her to be a fully embodied human character who's just out there living her life and going about her business, and vice versa.
We didn't
with
want every
Jen's
white person,
character.
not even just Jen, but every white person in the book to be just this clueless,
Yeah.
I don't know how to talk about race.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's also gratifying then when different audiences can come to this book. I think it's going to be, as these conversations are happening in book clubs, they're going to be very different. An all-Black audience reading this book is going to have a very different kind of conversation than an all-white audience reading this book. And I think that's what's fascinating about the book, and that's why we want to bring these audiences together, because the subjects, you know what I mean, what comes up is just going to be so different, and what the takeaways are just going to be so different and so fascinating. So this is another thing that Joe announced on Instagram that I learned about.
Yeah, I did. I had the idea. Again, I thought I told you. Where there's a lot of readers out there that want to have this conversation with someone who is not like them, in any way, right? Like age, race, economic
Geography.
status, geography, but they're like, but I don't.
Geography's a big one. That we don't talk about.
Geography's a huge one, but they're like, but I'm in a bubble. I'm in a white bubble. I'm in a Black bubble. I'm in a senior citizen boomer bubble. And so we're letting people DM us or email us, individuals, and also book clubs. So we're bringing together book clubs that are often
All white or
all white or all Black, which a lot of book clubs are segregated that way, and connecting people to have conversations about how they felt about the book, so that they can, because we do think there's going to be a lot of different points of view.
Yeah.
So is there a
spread
place
the
that
word.
people should? I don't want people emailing at 2 a.m. in the morning. But should they
Between normal business hours, you can reach
during
out.
normal business hours with respectful language? Is there a place that people should reach out to you?
Yeah, well, I'm
or
I'm
DMs.
collecting them on my Instagram DMs,
Okay.
so it's really, I'm just slide
It's
into
a real
my
grassroots operation
Yeah.
The
here.
creepiest thing that I say now is slide into my DMs, and I'll put you on my list of women. I'm Mitt Romney
That's
in
the
social
next
media.
dating novel. That's the next rom-com. Okay, I think we are out of time. Thank you, everyone who tuned
Oh my
in.
God,
Thank
this
you,
is
everyone who
great.
came.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, and
Thank you,
This book can be purchased everywhere, at a bookstore or bookshop.org is
We're
my
happy to
suggestion.
sign.
We're happy to sign them.
And both of these books,
Yes, read Glynnis's book.
We Are Not Like Them, and no one tells you this, they pair very well together.
They do, they're beautiful
It
together.
can be purchased really anywhere books are sold, but also here at SaksWorks, because we have copies available for subsidized purchase. So please come, stay, enjoy the space, and maybe go get yourself a stretch at Body Squad out there.
Yeah, I'm gonna stretch.
Yeah, it's a good
great.
time. And thank you so much for coming. Yay, thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you for
us,
having
Rachel.
us.
This is
This is
amazing.
awesome.